We have had people who decided they are going to keep the template where 60% of Kenyans are looking for food. 30% are struggling to not become the 60%. And 10% are really running the show here, but only 1% are the so-called crooks, are the ones who make sure that this is embedded. Now, that 1% is the same 1% that tries to put out an election question. We are campaigning because when we are talking and educating, we are trying to tell you and try and tell every Kenyan here that our problem is economic. And the problem in the economy is not your productivity. It's not you who is working very hard. It's not you that is anchored in getting an education to come for a job. No, it's not you that's an economic genocide that has been done on you. And that economic genocide is this debt. It is taking away. You will never produce. You will never produce. Never produce enough to take care of it. Said that we have a problem that we have had for 100 years of a system that was brought to us by a private company that became a government. And that system was about exploitation, extraction, and dominance. That is the bed of corruption. That is the bed of economic genocide. That is where it is anchored. So we have an onerous duty to change that system. And you change that system with ideology. We must create our own system. What we are living today is a system brought to us by a colonialist. We have to change that system. We have to create a system which is not about extraction from our land, that is not about exploitation of our people, that is not about domination of our people. And we fortunately have got a very good constitution that anchored our political rights and give us a platform to do it. And that platform that we are trying to do is the economic liberation. This is what we now need to deal with. And this is where all your questions are answered, whether it is corruption, theft, economic genocide. This is where they're answered, but we've got to understand that we've got to change the system. So what is this about our education system? What is it that was put to us by the Mzungu? Was he creating leaders, entrepreneurs, slaves? What? What was he producing? Because this is something we inherited from him, and we are still inheriting from him. What system, what product are we getting at the end? I'll give a comparison to a place called South Korea. South Korea, they tell you categorically, because the South Korean economy grew primarily because of the taking over the shipbuilding industry. They then got into technology. And they have a very basic education. They tell you, you need to be able to speak, have communication skills. You need to have a modicum of critical thinking through math. The rest will come as you and. But there are two things that will ensure that you have employment. Anything to do with whether it's marine law, steel, metal, ended up doing Hyundai cars, Daewoo cars and so on, and machinery, right? Naval architecture, right? Anything to do that you do well, and technology, chips, software. Everybody from the age of 6 knows where they are going to get employment. And that is anchored on a vision of a nation that is saying this is our niche in the world. This is where we are going in the world. This is a place that will take us to not only our prosperity, but our influence in the world. I think in the next G7 summit, I think South Korea is being accommodated. And you imagine South Korea economically was below us in 1972, 75. It is a question of vision of a leader. This is what changes everything. We had Sheila who is talking about, and you raised some very good questions, Sheila. How does one cut off the debt? How does one deal with the consequences of cutting off this debt? What happened to the public debt committee that Ruto employed? That public debt committee was just showbiz. It didn't even have one meeting. And eventually it collapsed. public audit of debt is anchored in the controller, in the Auditor General's office. In fact, they are to submit an audited account of the debts to Parliament 6 months after a new budget. So they would have assessed the debt of the previous financial year. Nancy Gadogo has admitted that she has not done it all these years. And they said that office has not done so because they have not had enough funds and resources to spread. But that is the law, it's anchored there. Ruto will never have a public audit committee. In fact, that one that was there, it was Gen Z that pushed it to a large degree, but it is something that was embedded and put by the World Bank and IMF, who said, we're having a lot of queries about this debt. What exactly has been going on here? And I hear they are still pushing. But I believe it is something that he will keep avoiding. He will say it's the Auditor General who's supposed to do it. It will be contested in court if you do otherwise. And he will never be funded to do it. And it will become something that we're just chasing up and down. Because this is where the true economic genocide that Milton was talking about happened. Here is where we have a problem. We have had people who decided they are going to keep the template where 60% of Kenyans are looking for food. 30% are struggling to not become the 60%. And 10% are really running the show here, but only 1% are the so-called crooks, are the ones who make sure that this is embedded. Now, that 1% is the same 1% that tries to put out an election question. Zani's talked about campaigning. We are campaigning because when we are talking and educating, we are trying to tell you and try and tell every Kenyan here that our problem is economic. And the problem in the economy is not your productivity. It's not you who is working very hard. It's not you that is anchored in getting an education to come for a job. No, it's not you no. There is, as Milton put it, an economic genocide that has been done on you. And that economic genocide is this debt. It is taking away. You will never produce. You will never produce. Never produce enough to take care of it. You will never produce enough to come out of the 60% below poverty. You are going to be slaves to this for the next 60 years unless we cut it off. And if people understand that this is the problem, that is the real question of any of the next election, then we are there. Ruto would like to make the question of the election about tribe. Maybe 41 against 1 or God knows what, right? He's talking rubbish. It's got nothing to do with tribe. This is something has been part of. He created this. Normally they say when you start doing bad things, you look for communities to save you, for community to protect you. This is all he's doing. It has nothing to do with any community. It is the community of Kenyans that have. An economic genocide has been done on us, and we must understand how it has been done, what has been done, and that the answer is to remove this problem. You cut off debt, we are free of that genocide. And we need, that is the true question of the next election cycle. Whenever it happens, it's the economy. It is not tribe. It is not what. And the leadership that is able to do that is the only one that Kenyans should be saying are going to be the ones who are elected. We want people who are going to say we're going to cut off this pain on day one. Anything short of that, we are not hearing. We are not hearing. So Milton, for example, you're asking, what happens to commercial banks? What can we do to stop them from loaning the government any more money? We have a big problem because the government tells them that, if you don't loan us, how do we pay your interest next week? We can't pay you. It's a Ponzi scheme. What you see as treasury bills and bonds are just to pay them back the same money because it's been accumulative of interest. So they feel if they're not going to get that money, they'll be in trouble. Their banks will close, they'll shut down. So they keep loaning. It's paper. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's literally become a Ponzi scheme. And it's getting very frightening for those banks now because as much as they have this Ponzi scheme and they're saying the difficulties government is having, they have another channel here called non-performing loans within their own cycle, which are now reaching something like 700 billion because they have stagnated the economy. The economy is dead. It has stagnated for the last 12 years. What happened under the Uhuru regime is that he created a balloon called debt, created a vehicle called government appearing like it's boosting development, but productivity was thrown out. Kibaki used to stand up and tell people, go back to your shamba. Go and deliver from your shamba, Lady Justice. He used to tell people, go back, mashambani. That is when VAT addition took root. We had all these days in plans under even Moi. We had a plan where we would be fully industrialized by 2020. What happened? Industrialization was 14% of GDP when Kibaki left. Today it is less than 7. What happened? Half have gone down. Kibaki came out with a 2030 vision. How much of it was implemented? It was never discussed and talked about in the Ruto regime. What were the milestones? Nobody talked about it. They came up with funny things like Big Four. I don't know what. Now this one comes up with bottom up. Nobody talks about 2030 vision. It's there. What happened? It was a master plan that was done, researched very well by an economic team that was very solid. Had people who came in who are ministers in Singapore. We had a lady from the UK. This was a solid program under the Ministry of Planning. And all that was thrown away because the intention was never to empower Kenyans. The intention was to make sure that we become slaves to a political regime that was bereft of ideas, but wanted to create dynasties and empires and control us.